what you're seeing is the use and the necessity of interoperable items, and we're getting there with the collaboration of the engineering community, which is part of this discussion about the Internet of Citizens. So what I'm going to try to do, because I hope you have read the paper that has been printed in the program, is not to repeat the paper, but try maybe to go behind that, and in particular, go deeper into the geopolitics of culture, reacting very much to Philip Schlesinger's presentation of yesterday, which was very much to the point and very necessary at this stage in our thinking. Because he asked a question of the user or the citizen. The answer is not easy. For internet and in the internet community, the citizen doesn't exist. He is a user. He is the top user here. And this is a pointer. He is here. What's deep at the bottom is what is of interest to us today. It's a thing called Icann, which is what gives us addresses, which allows us to have an existence online as users. Some users have more power than others, and they're not elected for that power. For instance, here you have Mark Zuckerberg and his proposal for a filter when we had the Je suis Charlie attacks in Paris. It created a huge controversy because the Lebanese, who'd been under attack 3 weeks ago, didn't have a chance to have their flag as a filter. Who decides? Who decides is the Icann community, which is made mostly of engineers, experts, companies, but also telecom operators on the one hand, and on the other hand, institutions of different kinds, especially the ones dealing with technology, because internet doesn't exist without a very solid infrastructure, which of course to users is not the point. What's more to the point for users, for us, for citizens, is that Icann depends on the US and on the Californian legal system. That's where everything is decided. And also some institution that nobody talks much about, VeriSign, that is supposed to ensure the security of all connections. Okay, so please remember this. I know it's basic literacy, internet literacy. My experience is that most people, especially decision makers, don't have it. Let's continue with geopolitics. Internet works and is based on a very stable system, which is called the root servers. And as you see, the root servers are here for VeriSign, Virginia, translate Washington, power, and here, California, translate legal system, translate IT. Interesting for us in Europe, one in Sweden to watch out over Russia, one in England to watch out over Europe, one in Japan to watch out over China. Most of the users of internet these days are here. They have one server, totally underrepresented. The next big community is here. No servers. Let's look at the data flows that generates. Interesting. Oops, sorry, what have I done? No. Data flows. US, West Coast less than East Coast, in spite of what you're led to think. Europe, some allies, the rest is a blank. These routes here connect here, these routes here connect here. It all goes through the US. they can see absolutely everything of the traffic of data flow in the world if they want. And let me make a parenthesis, I am not anti-American. This is just geopolitics as they are. So when we look more carefully now at data, because this is the topic of today, what do we see? We see that since 1996, the US government has suspended all legislation about internet and allowed it to go against all the antitrust regulations. As a result, it has allowed, oh, damn it. How do I go back? Yeah. It has allowed the existence of a very typical American system, which is a system of a duopoly. Not one, two. That way we don't have antitrust problems. And we're allowed to go worldwide. So you have two for infrastructure, you have two for search engines, and of course they've bought other things in the meantime and created themselves into portals. You have two for social media, you have two for the cultural elements around libraries, books, etc. This is the situation now worldwide. These companies, these portals, create the blue continent, and blue dominates. Blue is peaceful. But they also have acquired a position that is very hard to displace by any new entrant. There's a dark side to data, the deep web, or the black continent. The color is clear about it. What's interesting is that governments are part of it, the free community also, and of course the radicalized, and the ones who try to fight some forms of radicalization, those who launch alerts, etc. Very, very little known by the general public, the users, the citizens that we are. And yet, here it is, huge, compared to the blue. Here we surf, we have fun, we consider it's culture, and here we have all the rest, a mess. Trading in women and sex, medication, weapons, drugs, etc. Internet of citizens. There's an alternative one that people don't talk about, and the media don't talk about very much. I call it the orange continent because the dominant colors are orange. You recognize some of them. They have all the other elements of a blue continent. There's search engines, there's navigators, there's exploitation systems, and there's a lot of possibilities for apps and things like that. Who uses it? Now, data have acquired a lot of value. You're all familiar with this picture that shows 60 seconds on the web. I should say it's the web of culture, really, because that's where all the exchanges of popular culture, at least, take place. But in the United States, there's no strict separation between high culture and low culture, which is a bit of a contrast with us in Europe. But just to give you an idea, look at the amount of hours of video on YouTube in a minute. What does this do to culture? And when you consider young people and younger users who are born into this system, it's all about traces, 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 including paper, thank God. And the business model is now stabilized. The user gives his data to the pure players, who sell it to the vendors, and the vendors provide services and get money. Money is exchanged twice. The user is excluded from money here. As a result, after about 10 years now having social media, they started in 2005, 2006, we have what Ellie Pariser calls a filter bubble. The information is sent to you by all these nice platforms, and it reinforces you. You give your traces, and this is what it does, via algorithms that send you the information they think you like. But algorithms have no ethics. And so we're going to need to think about filters that are under public responsibility. What's coming up next is the Internet of Things, which is why we triggered the idea of the Internet of Citizens, because Internet of Things is scheduled to bring a lot of value to the blue continent and the dark continent. Manufacturing, all the sectors of activity are going to be affected. But in all the maps of the Internet of Things, and I ask you to go and check on Google or any other search engine of your own practice, the sectors that are never mentioned are media, culture, and education. And in fact, of course, the Internet of Things is really the data of things. Once we know this, and it's established and it's understood, I think we can start thinking about the kinds of actions we can take. The Internet Internet governance, how to govern the Internet, is something that is under construction, and there is at the moment a movement towards a global governance of Internet. UNESCO is part of it, the Council of Europe is part of it, it's been a big actor. Citizens are supposed to be part of it. And there are talks of having the UN and other entities pick up Icann and removing it from the American Department of Commerce. As you know, these talks are right now being reconsidered, and they play an important part in the American elections of November. Obama is willing to remove some of the American hold on the Internet, not the Republicans. But there are discussions, so it's nice. The Council of Europe is here, parliamentarians, okay, civil society, that's citizens, private sector, that's also citizens in some ways. So we are a lot. The conversation is global, which is a good thing. And we are reaching a kind of compromise of what could be the core principles for this Internet governance, maybe this Internet of Citizens. The idea of openness, the idea of interoperability that we've just experienced, the idea of security, which is also partly what we experience here, diversity and net neutrality, which has appeared more recently. You must be familiar a little bit by these principles because they are the ones that sometimes reach public opinion. Net neutrality, that has led to some debates. Diversity, not. Interoperability and openness and security, of course, since all the black, dark continent has emerged in terms of radicalization, especially of young people. It's a multi-stakeholder approach, which is interesting because it's also the approach that the Council of Europe, for instance, has, and the EU sometimes has. So it's very important to have trade, to have trust, to have all the stakeholders united, and civil society, academia, the internet and technical operators, governments, etc. Of course, each of the stakeholders has different intentions and agenda and missions, and they're very much the ones you expect. Business and economy is about trust and monetizing assets. States are mostly now about cybersecurity. Not sure it's the best idea, but they've been drawn into that because of the darknet, but it's also a way for them of entering a little bit in the policy and the geopolitics of internet. And civil society is crystallizing around a responsible use of the internet and general human rights. So if we try to think of Internet of Citizens and maybe push it, boost it, from the original recommendation 3 or 4 years ago, how should we go? I honestly have no idea. I'm just bringing this to the conversation and bringing elements to the discussion, hoping that as a collective we'll have more precise idea. But Philip Schlesinger yesterday said, it's a slogan in search of a substantive story to tell. Remember that? What story? What happened? Why is the romance gone? Who controls, etc.? The control at the moment is Hollywood. Hollywood plus all the web corporations of California. I call it Hollywood because they're coming together. They're actually eating each other, but they are coming together as a kind of consolidated entity. What was the original romance? It was a romance about culture. It was a romance against television, chewing gum of the eyes. Hence, YouTube. Television is called the tube in America. It was a romance against majority elitist culture around a counterculture which was very agrarian originally. The first big website on the net is called Nouvelle, and it's all about a catalog for agrarian communities. And it's led to cyberculture. Who has a vested interest in forgetting this original romance? Service providers. They also have a vested interest in not being media, because if they recognize that they are media, they would fall under media laws. And they don't want that. They want the freedom to disrupt as they want. But they are media. I showed you how many hours of video you had on YouTube. I could show it for every single one of them, Instagram, etc., etc. Therefore, they're deeply set into culture. So we have to do something about this as citizens. And they're very strong. I'm going back to Philip's idea of a story. They're very good at extolling their digital heroes. And they can, via Hollywood, produce massive storytelling about it. And it's a wonderfully biased storytelling. All the GAFAM creators are superheroes. They're better than the X-Men. We have our digital heroes too, believe it or not. But in Europe, we don't have the means to extol them. We have amnesia about them. Some of them are still existing. Louis Pouzin, for instance, a French guy who invented datagrams, the basic element for emails, who's now found open root. So he's trying to create a different kind of server. Remember the root servers? There's 16 of them, over 13 of them, most of them in America. He's trying to create an open root. He has created a company for this. And because we're in Estonia, of course, I had to talk about your heroes, because you have them. But believe me, nobody in France and the rest of Europe knows them. There's no story about them. It starts with a business in Sweden. Remember, Sweden has a root server? Nothing is accidental. So, how do we take up the challenge of Philip? How do we reconcile users and citizens? Via culture, via storytelling. Probably one of the best ways, and one of the things that culture knows how to do best. So, where are our storytellers? Where are the European storytellers that tell what we're doing in Europe? And we definitely have, since we have the knowledge now of this filter bubble, of the portal effect, of traces, we have a means to protest a certain amount of things. We can be against this. We are the biggest market of the Americans. We're the biggest market of the Chinese, who have not waited for Icann to create all their own search engines, etc., etc. There's an alternative orange, not orange, but an alternative blue, if you want, internet that is coming from China with their own search engines and their own services. But I would say that mostly we should be for some things. And I send you back to my paper here. We should be for equity of access. You saw how asymmetrical access was in the maps that I showed you about data. You saw that privacy is something that we have given away, that young people believe is not an important right. And Vint Cerf says it's a sort of an accident of history. Hi. History revisionism. Data portability, yeah? Why should they be kept by one portal? Why can't a user just change portals and bring all his data with him? Why does a child who develops an avatar on one game platform have to leave it behind when he wants to change platforms? Why can't he sell it, etc., etc.? Why does it all belong to the platform? What have we done? What have we forgotten to do for them? How are we protecting our young people or empowering them with their own creativity? Right to be forgotten? It's interesting because it's an idea that came from the Council of Europe, immediately picked up by Google, who is now the one who is both judge and party about removing or not data on his portals. Okay, Google is a friend. For pluralism and diversity of search engines, and they exist, and we have them, for information common and digital public domain. The GAFAMs, Amazon at the moment, and Apple are in a big fight to keep e-books within their own portals. They don't communicate with each other. The e-books and the content of these e-books remain the property of Apple and Amazon ad infinitum. There is no public domain. Nothing is going to become publicly shareable and accessible if we let them do it. And if you don't get a critical education, a critical literacy on all these things I've shown you, you're not going to be able to act. So media education, education at large, should embrace very fast all these issues, and it's not doing it. And I add one element, because it's an emerging element, and as a researcher, of course, I also have to look at prospective elements. It's called frugality. Because the other emergency we have is climate, and at the moment, this is what a data center, Google data center like this one, consumes, the equivalent of the energy of 25,000 US homes. This is the prediction. And I'm not mentioning, of course, all the pollution of computers when we abandon them, etc., etc. So we have a dual fight in defending frugality as Internet of Citizens. We are also, at the same time, defending the planet. And so my proposal is this one. Do whatever you want to do with it, is that we have to come together as European citizens. We are the only counterpoint. With the American citizens, we are the only counterbalance possible in this enormous power conflict that is disrupting our societies. Because we have commercial power as much as voting power. We are still democracies. China is not a democracy, Russia not a democracy. So we have a huge responsibility. Responsibility to say that, oops, come on, that we don't want the Internet of Things to evolve in a parallel course with Internet of Citizens and never meet. So we have to discuss with these people. They are parents too. They are educators too. They're sensitive to the future of their own children. A lot of the creators of the Internet of Things are still alive. And they have shown in the past that they can listen. So they're not the enemy. But if we don't engage them, they'll just continue doing whatever they do. And engineers don't pretend to have a political clout about what they invent. It's not their role. Portability of data, rights of cultural workers, these young people who are working all the time on their avatars and are not being paid and yet contribute a lot, but cultural workers at large. Critical internet, data commons, and frugality. I think if we come together on these items, and maybe less or maybe more, I don't know, and have a concerted effort to approach politicians, to approach the technical community, to do it through a platform that could be organized by the Council of Europe, because it's about 50 European countries, including Russia. We may be successful in counterbalancing a little bit what is going on, and this will always be to the benefit of culture. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup. Thanks a lot. And we'll take some questions. So, here we are. So, mics are somewhere. Can we bring some mics? Wait a bit.
Thank you. My name is Dave Hesmondhalgh from the University of Leeds. For many decades, the concept of public service has lain beneath attempts in Europe to provide common materials for citizenship. So I wondered whether you saw any remaining potential in the concept of public service and in the remaining public service organisations for achieving the kinds of goals you laid out so well.
Thank you for the question. You see that one of the problems we all have, because we have a transition generation, is to make sure that some of the battles we won in the pre-digital world keep being won in the digital world. Some of the values that we've developed. One of them has been public service. The GAFAMs don't want to hear about public service. Whenever we have discussions about them, they're against it. Remember, they are part of the American system. The American system has a very shriveled public service, very much piloted by the private sector, actually, and its foundations. So they don't recognize public service, and they don't want to embark in public service, because public service comes with public service obligations, like education. So in the conversations we've had with them, we talk about public value. Sometimes it's important to change the words because it allows you still to embark or embed your ideas in it. And so we're talking about the public value of the internet. We're trying to make it into a critical resource like water, like the climate, that needs to be protected by everybody and not just by the technical community, though it has a very important role in it, there's no questioning that. But so I think we have to bring together this idea that the public service is important. Maybe it's changing. Maybe it's his values that we have to put together. And that's what I'm trying to do. And what are the shared values that we want for the Internet of citizens? Is it public service obligations? For whom? For the providers? For the states? So it's an open discussion, but I think it's a discussion that needs to be opened. Because I think we need the commons. We need to have the possibility of sharing culture, of mixing and remixing it without being criminals, because at the moment we are criminalized, those of us who do remix. So there's a lot of elements to be put under this public value and public service. I would not separate them. In my experience, the best way to talk about the Internet of citizens is that it's not an Internet of oppositions and of polarizations. It's not the Internet of citizens or the Internet of things. Because of the incredible power of the net, it's an and situation. We can have the Internet of things and the Internet of citizens. We can have public service media online and a shared public value of the Internet online. And it's this end that we have to elicit together. Where do we want to put the thrust of our energies? We're not going to fight about everything. We have our lives besides the Internet, thank God. But as citizens, as parents, what can we do? For instance, the American parents, what have they done recently? They've voted, and they've made their parliamentarians pass a law on do not track our kids. At the moment, as you may know, the reason why there's this 13-year-old border for accessing social media is because of the American law. I hope you understood now that everything depends on American law. Because in COPPA, which is the Children's Protection Online Act of the United States of 1996, the children are protected until they're 13. Well, American parents have now passing a law saying we want them to be protected until they're 16. okay? What have we done here in Europe? Have we mobilized about that? So there is constituencies, there are groups of people that we can join, with whom we can fight together in this globalized environment. And as parents, as citizens, we have to create more solidarity and be more aware of the battles that are being fought in other places for very similar interests, because deep at heart, we are all humans too.